They said Hulk Hogan would never be forgotten, and these new photos prove it. Recently revealed images of Hulk Hogan's grave show exactly how Linda Hogan honored his final wishes, and the emotional tribute has fans talking. In this video, we break down the touching details behind the gravesite, the symbols chosen, and the heartfelt way Linda made sure Hogan's legacy lives on. Whether you're a lifelong wrestling fan or someone who just admired Hogan's larger-than-life personality, this story will give you goosebumps. Under a pale Florida sky, where the breeze carries the scent of the ocean and the whisper of palm fronds, a quiet corner of Clearwater has become the center of the wrestling world's mourning. It's here, beneath the shade of tall oaks and the slow sway of Spanish moss, that Hulk Hogan, the man who defined an era of wrestling, who turned the sport into a spectacle, and whose charisma-filled arenas rests for eternity. For weeks, the wrestling community had been waiting, wondering what his final resting place would look like. And now, with the release of newly surfaced photographs, fans finally have their answer, and it is as poignant as it is powerful. These images do not just show a grave. They tell a story of love, loyalty, and the fulfillment of a promise Linda Hogan made to her husband long before his passing. The photos, revealed by a close family source and now making their way across wrestling forums and tribute pages, show a site that is unmistakably tied to Hulk Hogan's larger-than-life persona. Yet, for all its connection to a man known for showmanship, the grave radiates a deep humility. It sits in a private section of the cemetery, not roped off with grandeur, but accessible to those who loved him. Fans who have visited describe feeling as though they are stepping into a space where the line between legend and man disappears. The site itself is framed by an arc of lush greenery, meticulously maintained, as if every blade of grass has been trimmed with care. In the center lies a headstone of polished black granite, reflecting the sunlight so brightly it almost feels alive. And carved into that granite is Hogan's full name, Terry Bollea, along with the simple, iconic words, "What you gonna do when heaven runs wild on you?" That inscription was no accident. According to those closest to the family, Hogan himself had chosen it years ago. Linda Hogan had once told a friend that during quiet evenings, when the cameras were gone and the cheers were just a memory, they would sometimes talk about legacy. He wanted people to smile when they saw it, she reportedly said. He wanted to be remembered for the joy he brought, not just the matches he won. That line, a twist on his famous catchphrase, ensures that, even in death, Hogan is still connecting to his fans in the same playful, powerful way he did in life. But the new photographs show more than words. They reveal the thoughtfulness in every detail. Just behind the headstone is a small bronze statue of an eagle in flight, wings spread wide. It's a symbol of freedom, strength, and resilience, all qualities Hogan valued deeply. Sources say the eagle wasn't a random choice. Hogan had long been fascinated with birds of prey and often said that if he could come back as anything, it would be a bald eagle soaring above the crowd. Linda made sure that wish became part of his resting place, ensuring the statue faced toward the ocean, as though watching over the waters he loved. Around the base of the grave, fans will notice an arrangement of red and yellow flowers, not just any flowers, but roses and chrysanthemums in the exact shades of his signature ring attire. According to one of the florists who has worked with Linda over the years, she requested those colors specifically, explaining that it wouldn't be Hogan without red and yellow. The flowers are refreshed weekly, a ritual Linda insisted on from the beginning. In one of the photos, you can see a small card nestled among the petals. It reads simply, "Forever my champion," signed with her initials. Perhaps the most moving part of the photos is the bench placed just a few feet away. Made of smooth marble, it bears an engraved quote, "A real American forever." This bench, family sources say, was Linda's way of giving fans and loved ones a place to sit, reflect, and share their own moments with Hogan. Wrestling memorabilia has already begun appearing there: action figures, old ticket stubs, bandanas, and handwritten letters from fans recounting how Hogan inspired them to believe in themselves when no one else did. Linda, who has been quietly visiting the site several times a week, reportedly reads these letters during her visits. One friend confided that she sometimes leaves a note of her own, slipping it under the bench where only she and Hogan would know it's there. The photos have sparked a wave of emotion across the wrestling community. On social media, tributes poured in within hours of their release. Former WWE stars shared their own memories of Hogan, many focusing on the way he lifted others up behind the scenes. Some noted that the grave reflects that same uplifting energy, a place that invites, rather than intimidates. It is, in many ways, the opposite of the over-the-top entrances Hogan was famous for. In death, the man who was once the loudest voice in the arena has been given a resting place that speaks in quiet dignity. Linda Hogan's role in all of this cannot be overstated. For those who knew them personally, the design of the gravesite is pure Linda, equal parts intimate, symbolic, and fiercely loyal to the man she loved. Friends recall how she kept a detailed notebook in the months after Hogan's passing, filled with sketches, quotes, and ideas that reflected conversations they had shared over the years. In that notebook, she reportedly had a page titled His Heaven, where she listed the things he would want to see from his final resting place: sunshine, palm trees, the ocean breeze, and a reminder of the fans who stood by him through everything. The new photographs show she delivered on every one of those wishes, and yet the grave is not just a tribute from Linda. It has become a gathering point for fans from around the world. In the days since the photos went public, wrestling enthusiasts have made pilgrimages to Clearwater to see it for themselves. Some come wearing the classic red and yellow bandana. Others bring their children to introduce them to the man who inspired a generation. They kneel, they place flowers, they take quiet moments to reflect. One fan, who flew in from Toronto, told a local reporter, "Standing here, you feel like you're part of something bigger, like all of us who grew up with Hulkamania are connected in this one spot." There's a bittersweetness to the entire scene. Hogan was a man who thrived on energy, on the roar of the crowd, on the electricity of live performance. Now his resting place is still, save for the rustle of leaves and the sound of waves in the distance. But in that stillness lies the essence of his legacy, a reminder that the most enduring impact isn't in the noise we make, but in the lives we touch. The eagle's wings, frozen mid-flight, seem to symbolize not an ending, but a continuation, that Hogan's influence still soars far beyond the grave. It's also worth noting that the site includes one deeply personal touch that didn't make headlines until now. Etched discreetly on the back of the headstone, visible only if you walk around to the far side, are the names of Hogan's children and grandchildren. This, Linda explained to a friend, was non-negotiable. He was a superstar to the world, but to us, he was family first, she said. The inclusion of those names ensures that, even as fans pay tribute to the legend, the man who was a father and grandfather is honored equally. These new images of Hulk Hogan's grave have not just satisfied curiosity. They have reignited conversation about his impact on wrestling and culture as a whole. They've reminded people that behind the muscles, the bravado, and the scripted rivalries was a man with a beating heart, deep passions, and wishes that his loved ones took to heart. Linda Hogan's fulfillment of those wishes stands as a testament to the bond they shared, one that endured through triumphs, scandals, separations, and reconciliations. She didn't just give him a grave. She gave him a home where his spirit can live on in the hearts of millions, and as the sun sets over Clearwater, casting long golden rays across that polished granite, the words carved into it take on a deeper resonance. What you gonna do when heaven runs wild on you? It's a question fans will carry with them, not as a challenge, but as a reminder. A reminder to live boldly, love fiercely, and leave behind something worth remembering. In fulfilling his final wishes, Linda Hogan has ensured that her husband's legacy isn't just preserved, it's alive, breathing in the laughter of fans who remember, in the tears of those who mourn, and in the quiet dignity of a grave that tells the story of a life lived larger than life itself. Because here, in this quiet corner of Florida, Hulk Hogan is still running wild, not in the ring, but in the hearts of those who will never forget him. And thanks to Linda, the man behind the legend has been given a resting place that feels less like an ending and more like a promise kept. In the weeks leading up to the unveiling of Hulk Hogan's final resting place, the process of creating it had been one of quiet dedication, a labor of love carried almost entirely by Linda Hogan herself. While the public mourned and the wrestling community poured tributes onto social media, Linda was immersed in something far more personal, the intimate, painstaking task of turning Hogan's final wishes into a tangible reality. Friends close to her have since revealed that the preparation began almost immediately after the private funeral, a process shielded from cameras, conducted in whispered meetings with stonemasons, florists, and landscape designers. One of the most striking revelations about these behind-the-scenes weeks is how meticulous Linda was in every decision. The choice of polished black granite for the headstone, for example, was not a stylistic impulse, but an echo of something Hogan had once said to her during their years together. They had been walking through a cemetery in Georgia after visiting a family friend's grave, and Hogan had paused in front of a particular stone. "Black granite," he said, running his fingers over the smooth surface. "That's timeless. It doesn't fade, and it reflects light. Even in the dark, it catches a glint. That's what I'd want." Linda never forgot it. When the time came, she found a local craftsman who specialized in precisely that material, ensuring that the finish would withstand decades of Florida's humid, salt-tinged air without losing its shine. The location itself was another deeply considered choice. Hogan had spent much of his life in Clearwater, a city he loved for its balance of privacy and community. It was here he found peace away from the constant roar of arenas, where he could fish quietly at dawn or stroll down the beach unnoticed by tourists who mistook him for just another local. Linda scouted multiple sites, but settled on one tucked in the quieter end of the cemetery, under the shelter of trees that still allowed for an open view of the ocean breeze. He always said the sound of the wind through palm trees was better than any applause, Linda later confided to a friend. "I wanted him to have that forever." Every symbolic element of the site had a story. The eagle statue, already visible in the recently released photos, was commissioned from a sculptor who had once worked on props for Hogan's wrestling promos. The artist, who asked to remain unnamed, said Linda insisted the bird's expression should be fierce, but calm, a representation not of battle, but of watchfulness. "She told me, this eagle isn't here to fight, it's here to guard him," the sculptor recalled. It was cast in bronze, its wings permanently outstretched as if ready to lift off toward the ocean horizon. Perhaps the most delicate part of Linda's task was ensuring that Hogan's identity as both a legend and a man was represented equally. She knew the temptation might be to lean heavily on the showmanship of Hulkamania, the bright colors, the over-the-top slogans, the larger-than-life persona. And while those elements were undeniably part of him, they were not all of him. That's why, in addition to the bold red and yellow floral arrangements that fans immediately recognize, she included the bench, a place for quiet reflection, and the discreet engraving of family names on the back of the headstone. "He was a dad, a grandfather, a friend," Linda told one confidant. "I didn't want that to be lost in the shadow of the superstar." When the final design was approved, Linda worked in near secrecy. She coordinated early morning visits to the site with landscapers, often arriving before the sun was up so that she could walk the grounds in solitude before work began. She brought with her a collection of personal items, an old bandana, a photo of the two of them from the 1980s, a small vial of sand from a beach they had vacationed on in Hawaii, placing each item at the site before the workers arrived, as if introducing them to the space that would soon be his permanent home. The crew noticed this ritual, but never intruded. It was like she was blessing the place, one of them said later. By the time the grave was completed, it had become more than a memorial. It was a space infused with Linda's devotion, Hogan's personality, and a sense of connection to the millions of fans he inspired. And when the new photos were finally taken and quietly circulated, they captured that fusion perfectly. The images show not just a resting place, but a conversation between the man he was and the man he wanted the world to remember. The reaction to those photographs was immediate and profound. Wrestling forums exploded with discussion threads, each image analyzed with the kind of attention usually reserved for championship matches. Fans commented on the way the headstone seemed to glow in the sunlight, on the placement of the flowers, on the subtlety of the eagle's gaze. Many said the grave felt right, that it captured both the energy of the Hulk Hogan persona and the gentler, more reflective spirit of Terry Bollea. Former wrestlers posted their own tributes, with some promising to visit the site in person when their schedules allowed. One veteran performer, who had shared the ring with Hogan countless times, wrote, "It's exactly how I'd want to remember him, strong, grounded, and looking out over the people he loved." But beyond the public admiration, the release of the photos had a quieter, more personal impact. Several of Hogan's oldest friends, men and women who had known him long before the fame, made their first visits to the grave in the days after seeing the images. They came with flowers, yes, but also with laughter and stories, standing around the bench and recalling road trips, locker room pranks, and long nights spent dreaming up matches that would go down in history. In that way, the grave became not just a place of mourning, but of storytelling, a living archive where his presence could still be felt. Linda has been seen at the site during some of these visits, often staying back as friends and fans approach. She does not seek to dominate the moment or make herself the focus. Instead, she watches quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes wiping away tears. Those who have spoken to her say she finds comfort in seeing others connect with the space she worked so hard to create. "It's like he's still hosting people," she said once. "Still making everyone feel welcome." What few people know is that the release of these photos was not spontaneous. Linda had debated for weeks whether to allow them to be shared publicly. Part of her wanted to keep the grave as private as possible, fearing that too much attention might turn it into a spectacle. But ultimately, she decided that letting fans see it, even from a distance, was in keeping with Hogan's nature. "He always wanted his fans to be part of his life," she said. "Even now, I think he'd want them to be part of this." The choice proved to be the right one. Rather than turning the site into a media circus, the photographs seem to have inspired a wave of respectful visits and tributes. Fans who make the journey to Clearwater often leave small tokens, bracelets, notes, miniature championship belts, and many take the time to sit on the bench, absorbing the quiet beauty of the surroundings. The cemetery staff have remarked on how peaceful these visits are, how the space seems to bring out the best in people. "You can tell this was made with love," one groundskeeper said. "You can feel it." Even those who have never met Hulk Hogan are finding meaning in the images. For many, the grave is a reminder that behind every public figure is a human being with private joys, struggles, and dreams. It's a testament to the fact that legacy is not just built in arenas and under bright lights, but in the quieter choices we make, in the way we treat those we love, in the care we take to honor promises. And so, as the weeks pass and the photos continue to circulate, the grave has become a kind of pilgrimage site, not just for wrestling fans, but for anyone who has ever been moved by the idea of keeping someone's memory alive exactly as they would have wanted. Linda's work, done with such precision and heart, stands as proof that even in grief, there is room for beauty, for dignity, and for the kind of connection that transcends death, because here, in this quiet Florida cemetery, the man who once towered over crowds in bright lights and roaring arenas is still standing tall, not in body, but in spirit, in stone, and in the memories of those who will never stop hearing his voice, never stop seeing that smile, and never stop feeling the power of Hulkamania running wild. Since the release of the photographs, Hulk Hogan's gravesite has quietly transformed into something more than just a memorial. It has become a living, breathing space of remembrance, a pilgrimage site for fans from across the globe. Every few days, there's someone new kneeling by the headstone, someone else quietly sitting on the marble bench, and others walking up the winding path with a mixture of awe and sadness in their eyes. It is no longer simply a grave in Clearwater. It's a destination for those whose lives were touched by Hogan's unmatched charisma and the values he projected inside and outside the wrestling ring. The variety of tributes left at the site speaks volumes about the breadth of his impact. On any given morning, The base of the polished black granite stone is dotted with little mementos, from decades-old action figures still in their packaging to faded event tickets from WrestleMania 3, carefully laminated to preserve their history. One visitor left a red and yellow feather boa, the same kind Hogan would drape around his neck before strutting down the ramp. Another placed a pair of worn weightlifting gloves with a note tucked inside, reading simply, "You made me believe I could be strong." It is these deeply personal touches that Linda Hogan has noticed most during her visits. She sometimes takes the time to collect the notes after they've sat in the sun and reads them privately at home. Friends say she keeps them in a cedar box in her living room, calling it her Hogan archive. The cemetery staff have been moved by the steady flow of people. They've noticed how fans tend to linger longer here than at other graves. Some sit silently for 30 minutes or more, lost in thought. Others quietly hum the opening bars of Real American, Hogan's iconic entrance theme, under their breath, almost like a prayer. There have been tears, of course, but also smiles, the kind that come from remembering the joy Hogan brought into people's lives. One staff member recalled a group of 3 middle-aged men who arrived wearing matching Hulkamania shirts, each carrying a small beer. They sat on the bench, shared a toast, and took turns telling their favorite Hogan match stories. It felt like they were visiting an old friend, the staffer said. For some, the pilgrimage has been about closure. One man from Chicago, who traveled over 1,100 miles, left a letter that was later photographed by another visitor. It read, "Dear Hulk, I watched you with my dad when I was a kid. We didn't always get along, but when you were on TV, we were on the same side. You brought us together. Thank you for that. Rest easy, brother." That note, according to the person who found it, was placed carefully at the eagle statue's base, weighted down with a smooth stone so the wind wouldn't take it. Linda herself reportedly read it and was so touched she arranged for the letter to be preserved in a small display case at her home. What makes the site so powerful is how much it mirrors Hogan's own energy, bold yet inviting, personal yet universal. That balance was intentional, born of Linda's determination to keep his legacy alive without turning it into a spectacle. She knew Hogan would have wanted his fans to feel welcome, to be able to come close, touch the stone, and feel as though they were part of his story. And so she has worked quietly with the cemetery to ensure the site is maintained in a way that accommodates visitors without losing its dignity. The flowers are replaced weekly, always red and yellow. The bench is polished regularly so names and messages carved into it by fans, yes, some have discreetly etched initials or short phrases, remain visible, but respectful. Linda's own connection to the site goes beyond maintenance. According to those close to her, she has begun incorporating small rituals into her visits. Some mornings, she brings a thermos of Hogan's favorite coffee blend and pours a cup, setting it down at the base of the stone before sitting in silence. On special dates, his birthday, their wedding anniversary, she brings something personal from their life together. Once, she brought a silver pendant he had given her in the early 1990s, left it at the foot of the eagle statue for the afternoon, and then took it back home, saying it had been charged with his spirit once more. Her presence hasn't gone unnoticed by fans. There have been moments when visitors, not realizing she would be there, suddenly found themselves standing a few feet away from Linda Hogan herself. She rarely engages directly, not out of coldness, but because she seems to understand that each fan is having their own private moment. Still, there have been exceptions. One young boy, no older than 10, visited with his father and brought a hand-drawn picture of Hogan in the ring. Linda reportedly walked over, knelt beside him, and told him he would have loved this. She then asked if she could keep the drawing, promising to put it somewhere special. The emotional power of the gravesite has also caught the attention of Hogan's wrestling peers. A few former WWE and WCW colleagues have made quiet visits, choosing to keep their appearances low profile. One source confirmed that a certain Hall of Famer spent nearly an hour there alone, leaving behind his own championship ring replica as a token of respect. That small gold ring was spotted in some of the most recent photos, gleaming faintly in the Florida sun, and while Linda has not made any official public statements about the photographs or the site since their release, Those who know her well say she sees it as part of a larger mission, not just to honor Hogan, but to ensure that his values, as he saw them, remain part of the conversation. In recent weeks, she has quietly begun planning a charitable initiative in his name, something tied to youth fitness and anti-bullying programs. The idea, she has said privately, is to make sure kids know the same courage he preached in the ring can be lived out in the real world. The grave itself has started to reflect that ongoing mission. Some of the items left by visitors, wristbands from charity events Hogan supported, signed posters from his benefit appearances, have been preserved in a rotating display in a weatherproof case near the bench. Linda worked with the cemetery to make this possible, believing it would allow fans to see how Hogan's reach extended far beyond wrestling. That case, modest in size but rich in meaning, has quickly become a focal point for visitors. They linger there before turning toward the headstone, as though the artifacts help them connect more deeply to the man beneath the legend. The truth is, these new photos did more than show a grave. They sparked a wave of connection between strangers who share a common bond in Hulk Hogan's story. On wrestling forums and social media pages, fans have been organizing informal, gravesite meetups, arranging to visit in small groups to share stories, take photos, and leave collective tributes. One such group recently brought a portable speaker and softly played Real American as they stood around the site, singing along quietly with the chorus. "It wasn't loud," one attendee said. "It was like we were singing him home, even though he's already there." For Linda, this evolving community of mourners and celebrators has been a source of both comfort and purpose. She has reportedly begun documenting the tributes in photographs, compiling them into a private scrapbook. "It's my way of keeping track of the love," she told a close friend. So one day, the grandkids can see just how much he meant to the world. That scrapbook, much like the grave itself, is an ongoing work, never static, always growing, just as Hogan's influence continues to grow even after his passing. In many ways, what's happening at that gravesite is exactly what Hogan himself would have wanted, a place where people can gather, share a laugh, shed a tear, and leave feeling just a little stronger than when they arrived. And with Linda's careful stewardship, it has become a sanctuary not only for grief, but for the celebration of a life that truly was larger than life. The day the photographs of Hulk Hogan's grave were taken was not a random occurrence. It was a carefully chosen moment, one that carried its own sense of ceremony even before the images ever reached the public. According to those close to Linda Hogan, she had been preparing for weeks, waiting for the right combination of weather, timing, and readiness in her own heart. Clearwater can be unpredictable in late afternoon, one moment awash in golden sunlight, the next under the shadow of drifting clouds, and Linda wanted the images to capture the site in a light that would reflect exactly how she saw it: warm, dignified, and alive. That morning, she rose early, long before the photographers arrived. She visited the grave herself, carrying with her a fresh arrangement of red and yellow roses, each stem handpicked from a local florist she'd used for decades. It wasn't just about color. She had chosen blooms with full, rounded heads and rich, deep tones that seemed to glow against the black granite. She replaced the existing arrangement, careful to position each flower as if she were arranging a ring entrance, deliberate, precise, meaningful. Then she stepped back, studying the site with a critical eye, not as a grieving widow, but as a curator of a space she considered sacred. Before the photographers arrived, she also made a quiet change no one noticed until the images were released. She cleaned the eagle statue herself. With a soft cloth and a gentle bronze polish, she wiped away the faint traces of Florida's salty air, revealing a gleam in the metal that caught the late morning sun. She wanted the eagle's wings to glint, as if mid-flight, for the world to see. The photographers themselves were not members of the press. They were family friends, people Linda trusted to respect the gravity of the moment. No one shouted instructions or hurried her along. Instead, they worked in near silence, capturing every angle. The front of the stone with its famous inscription, the engraved family names on the back, the bench with its Real American dedication, the eagle poised over it all. They also took wider shots to capture the setting, the palm trees swaying gently in the breeze, the dappled sunlight spilling across the grass, and in the far distance, the faint shimmer of the Gulf. Linda was present for every frame. She didn't pose or try to insert herself into the photos. She stood off to the side, watching, sometimes with her arms folded, other times clasping her hands at her waist. Friends who were there said she seemed both proud and heavy-hearted, proud because the sight looked exactly as she had envisioned, and heavy-hearted because photographing it meant, in a way, that she was ready to share it with the world, to make the private final resting place of her husband part of a public story. When the final shots were taken, Linda walked slowly to the headstone, laid her palm against the polished surface, and whispered something no one could hear. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped away, leaving the photographers to pack their gear. It was as though she needed that private moment before letting the rest of the world in. The release of the images was equally deliberate. There was no press conference, no formal statement. Instead, the photos appeared quietly online, shared first by a small fan page dedicated to preserving Hogan's legacy. Within hours, they spread like wildfire, reposted on wrestling forums, fan Instagram accounts, and Twitter feeds of wrestling journalists. The initial reaction was a wave of silence, not because people were unmoved, but because the images spoke for themselves. The first comments were simple, beautiful, perfect tribute. That's Hulk. Then came the longer posts. Fans recounting personal memories, stories of meeting Hogan at signings, of growing up with his posters on their bedroom walls, of watching him battle in the ring with their parents or grandparents by their side. One fan wrote, "Seeing this grave, you realize he was more than the character. He was a man with people who loved him enough to get every detail right." Another added, "Linda nailed it. You can tell she knew exactly what he would have wanted." The wrestling world itself began reacting in waves. Several current WWE superstars shared the images on their social media, adding brief tributes. One former rival of Hogan's wrote, "We fought in the ring, we laughed backstage, and we shared the same dream." This is how a legend should be honored. Even those who had complicated histories with him found themselves softened by the sight of the grave, with its blend of grandeur and restraint. As the days passed, the images became a topic of conversation on wrestling podcasts and YouTube channels. Analysts who usually dissect match statistics and storyline arcs found themselves talking about symbolism, the eagle, the bench, the red and yellow flowers. Some debated which elements were most powerful, while others simply admired the way it all came together. A well-known wrestling historian noted, "This is one of the rare instances where a wrestler's final resting place feels like an extension of their character, but also a representation of their humanity." The emotional impact rippled outward. Fans began organizing trips to Clearwater, posting photos of themselves at the site with captions like, "Finally paid my respects to the champ," and "Thank you for everything, Hulk." Local florists reported an uptick in orders for red and yellow arrangements, many of them requested for delivery to the cemetery. Some visitors brought mementos that weren't wrestling-related at all. Small fishing lures, guitar picks, and photographs of sunsets Hogan had once posted on social media. It was as if people wanted to acknowledge every side of him, not just the showman. Through it all, Linda remained publicly silent. She didn't post the photos herself, didn't give interviews, and didn't appear at the grave while crowds were there. But those who know her say she was watching from a distance, reading the comments, seeing the tributes, and quietly moved by the outpouring of love. She had taken a risk in opening up this part of her life to the world, and the reception confirmed that the risk had been worth it. By the end of that first week, the grave had already begun to take on a life of its own in the public imagination. The inscription, "What you gonna do when heaven runs wild on you," was being quoted across social media, not just by wrestling fans, but by people in other sports, in entertainment, even in military tribute pages. It had transcended its origins to become a universal reminder of living boldly and leaving a mark that no passing of time could erase. And yet, for all the global attention, the grave remained exactly what Linda intended, a place of peace. The photos might have carried it into the public eye, but in Clearwater, under the shade of those palm trees and the watchful gaze of the bronze eagle, it was still just what it had always been, the final resting place of a man who meant something to millions. And everything to the woman who made sure his last wishes were honored down to the smallest detail. In the days following the release of the photographs, while fans and media outlets continued to share and dissect every detail of Hulk Hogan's grave, a quieter, more intimate wave of visits began. This was not the bustling stream of fans in Hulkamania shirts or the social media influencers taking selfies at the bench. These were the people who had known Terry Bollea long before the bright lights, long before the roar of the crowd, and long before the name Hulk Hogan became a global brand. Old friends, wrestling brothers, men and women who had bled, sweat, laughed, and cried alongside him in the business, some of them on the road with him for decades. One of the first to arrive was a man whose friendship with Hogan spanned back to the territorial days of wrestling, before cable television turned the sport into a mainstream spectacle. He came quietly, no entourage, no fanfare. The cemetery staff recognized him instantly, though he wore a baseball cap pulled low. Carrying nothing but a small bundle of white lilies, a flower Hogan had once said reminded him of his mother, he approached the headstone slowly. He didn't sit on the bench at first. He stood, his hands resting on the polished granite, head bowed. For nearly 20 minutes, he stayed like that, whispering under his breath words no one else could hear. When he finally did sit down, he pulled a folded, yellowed photograph from his pocket, the two of them, in their younger years, grinning with their arms around each other, championship belts slung over their shoulders. He placed it gently under the base of the eagle statue, adjusted it so the wind wouldn't carry it away, and then left without looking back. The following afternoon brought another familiar figure, a former tag team partner from Hogan's WCW days. He didn't bring flowers or photos. Instead, he carried a small velvet pouch. When he reached the grave, he knelt, opened the pouch, and placed its contents, a replica of the championship belt plate they had once held together, at the foot of the stone. "We said we'd be champs forever," he murmured, his voice cracking just enough for a nearby fan to catch. "Guess I'll hold up my end here." Before leaving, he traced the inscription on the headstone with his fingertips, mouthing the words, "What ya gonna do?" and finishing it in his head. Linda Hogan had anticipated these visits. In fact, she had quietly reached out to some of Hogan's closest friends, letting them know the site was ready, that it was finally in the state she believed would make him proud. She made no public announcements. These were personal invitations, extended to those she knew had been part of his journey in ways the public could never fully understand. They gave him pieces of themselves on the road, she told a confidant. They deserve a piece of him now. One of the most emotional reunions at the site came a week after the photos went public. 3 men, all legends in their own right, arrived together just before sunset. To wrestling fans, they were iconic figures from Hogan's most famous storylines, his closest allies and fiercest rivals. But in that moment, there was no kayfabe, no good guy or bad guy act. Just brothers in arms, united in grief. They stood in a loose semicircle around the grave, each one taking a turn to speak. Their voices were quiet, almost reverent, but those close enough to hear caught fragments, inside jokes from decades past, road stories involving late-night diners and missed flights. Moments that could only be shared by men who had spent years living out of suitcases together. After their quiet exchange, one of them, known for his larger-than-life personality and booming voice, broke the silence with a line that made the others laugh through their tears. "Bet he's up there booking himself in the main event already." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was real, the kind that comes from remembering not just the legend, but the friend. Linda, who had been standing back near her car, watched it all from a respectful distance. She didn't intrude, didn't insert herself into their moment. But as they turned to leave, one of the men walked over to her, removed a necklace he'd been wearing, a gold chain Hogan had given him after a particularly grueling tour, and pressed it into her hand. "Put it with him," he said simply. Linda nodded, her eyes wet, and promised she would. That night, after the cemetery had closed to the public, she returned alone. She placed the chain inside a small box and tucked it behind the flowers, just under the headstone, where it would remain safe. To her, it was more than a gift. It was a piece of Hogan's story finding its way back to him. These private visits weren't covered by the press. There were no headlines, no viral videos. But word of them trickled out through whispers in the wrestling community, adding another layer to the significance of the grave. Fans began to speak of it not just as a place to honor Hogan, but as a place where the bonds forged in the unforgiving world of professional wrestling could be acknowledged, even healed. Some of the men who came hadn't spoken to Hogan in years. Their relationships strained by business disputes, personal misunderstandings, or the inevitable drift of time. For them, the gravesite offered a form of closure they hadn't realized they needed. "You think you've got forever to fix things," one former rival confided afterward. "Then you find yourself standing over the grave of the guy who made you who you are, and forever's gone." In the weeks since those visits, Linda has continued to receive small packages in the mail: a monogrammed towel from a former gym buddy, a backstage pass from a 1985 Madison Square Garden show. Even an old Polaroid of Hogan helping a young rookie tape his wrists before a match. She places some of these mementos at the grave, rotating them every few weeks so the site remains fresh, but always deeply personal. Others she keeps at home, in what has now become a growing collection of items that collectively tell the story of not just Hulk Hogan, the entertainer, but Terry Bollea, the man. It's in these moments, when the cemetery is quiet, the sun low, and the air filled with the soft rustle of palm fronds, that the true weight of his absence settles in. And yet, there's a strange piece too. Because every time an old friend leaves something behind, every time a fan makes the journey to sit on that bench, the promise Linda made to him, that he would be remembered exactly as he wanted, is being kept. As the initial wave of grief settled into a steadier rhythm of visits, Linda Hogan began to think ahead, not just about preserving the grave as a sanctuary, but about creating a moment where the entire wrestling community, from lifelong fans to industry peers, could come together in one place to celebrate Hulk Hogan's life. She knew that the one-year anniversary of his passing would be a milestone, one that would inevitably draw attention. And rather than leave it to chance, she wanted to shape that attention into something meaningful, something Hogan himself would have smiled at. The planning began quietly, almost in secret. Linda confided in only a handful of people, trusted friends, a few of Hogan's closest colleagues, and the small cemetery management team who would need to approve the gathering. Her first request was that the event remain grounded in authenticity. "I don't want a spectacle," she told a friend over coffee one morning. "This isn't about ticket sales or sponsors. It's about love. It's about family, and I mean the family he built in and out of the ring." Her vision was simple but powerful, an intimate public tribute at the gravesite, timed for late afternoon when the Florida sun would bathe the cemetery in warm golden light. The ceremony would include a moment of silence, a reading of letters from fans, and a series of brief, heartfelt speeches from those who had known him best. There would be no stage, no bright lights, just a portable sound system and rows of folding chairs placed under the shade of the trees. She even envisioned fans sitting on the grass if they wanted, close enough to touch the earth where Hogan now rested. The most personal part of the event, Linda decided early on, would be the unveiling of something new at the grave. She had already commissioned a custom plaque to be set into the ground beside the bench. The plaque, she explained to the stonemason, would feature a simple engraving, Hogan's signature in his own handwriting, taken from an old autograph, with the words "Train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins" curling underneath. "It's who he was," she told the craftsman. "That message meant something to generations of kids. I want them to see it and remember they can live it." Word of the possible anniversary tribute began to trickle through the wrestling community even before Linda finalized the date. A retired announcer let it slip during a podcast that something special was being planned in Clearwater. Former wrestlers hinted at reserving the day in their calendars. One well-known wrestler-turned-actor posted a cryptic message on Instagram, a photo of his old wrestling boots with the caption, "Saving these for an important walk in February." Fans, as they always do, began to connect the dots. By early spring, wrestling forums were buzzing with speculation. Would WWE send a delegation? Would some of Hogan's most famous rivals appear and speak? Could the NWO brothers reunite for the occasion? Linda stayed quiet, refusing to confirm or deny anything. The less people know, the more they'll just come for the right reasons, she told a confidant. No one should show up just for the headlines. They should show up because he meant something to them. Behind the scenes, she was working tirelessly. She coordinated with the cemetery to arrange extra parking, knowing the usual lot would never handle the influx of visitors. She asked a local florist to prepare hundreds of small single-stem red and yellow roses that could be handed out to guests as they arrived, each one wrapped in ribbons so it could be laid on the grave without damaging the flowers already there. She also reached out to a handful of musicians Hogan had been close to over the years, exploring the idea of a soft acoustic performance to close the ceremony. Nothing loud, nothing showy, just something that would feel like a farewell lullaby. What struck those helping her most was the level of detail she considered. She made arrangements for cold bottled water and sun hats to be available for elderly fans. She arranged for the eagle statue to be professionally polished the morning of the event. She even insisted on a discreet security detail, not to keep fans away, but to ensure the site remained safe and serene in case of large crowds. When the whispers about the tribute reached some of Hogan's old locker room brothers, they began reaching out to Linda directly. A few offered to speak, others said they would prefer just to attend quietly and pay their respects. One man, a wrestler who had once shared one of Hogan's most iconic WrestleMania moments, told her he wanted to stand by her side during the entire ceremony. "He would have wanted me there for you," he said simply. The wrestling media began speculating on whether the tribute might mark a rare moment of unity in a sport so often divided by rival promotions and old grudges. Pundits noted that Hogan had spanned multiple eras and companies, making him a figure who could draw together people who otherwise never shared the same stage. If anyone could bring all the tribes under one tent again, even for a day, it's Hogan, one columnist wrote. As the date drew nearer, Linda made one final decision. The tribute would be open to the public, but with an understanding that it was not a fan convention. There would be no autograph tables, no merchandise booths, no commercial tie-ins. "This is sacred ground," she reminded those helping her. "This is about Terry." Still, she understood that fans would want to take something home, a token of the day. So she quietly ordered a batch of small commemorative cards, each one featuring a photograph of the grave from the original set of images, with a brief message on the back: "Thank you for keeping Hulkamania alive. Love, Linda Hogan." These would be given freely to anyone who attended, slipped into their hands along with the rose. As word spread, travel plans began to form. Fans from as far as Canada, Japan, and Australia posted online that they were booking flights. Clearwater hotels reported an unusual spike in February reservations. Local news outlets began making calls to the cemetery, trying to confirm the story. And while the staff politely declined to share details, their smiles gave away more than their words. For Linda, the buzz was both humbling and bittersweet. She would sometimes stand at the grave in the weeks leading up to the event, looking at the bench and imagining it surrounded by people, not strangers, but fellow keepers of Hogan's memory. In those moments, she felt the same blend of pride and grief she'd felt the day the photographs were first taken. "He's still bringing people together," she whispered one afternoon, her voice barely audible over the breeze. "When the day finally arrives, Clearwater will hold its breath. There will be fans in red and yellow. There will be wrestlers who haven't shared the same air in years. There will be tears, and there will be laughter. And there, at the center of it all, will be the grave, the polished granite, the eagle in flight, the flowers, the bench, and the plaque bearing a message from a man who, even in death, still tells the world to train, say their prayers, and eat their vitamins." And for Linda Hogan, It will be the culmination of a promise kept, not just to fulfill his funeral wishes, but to make sure that a year after his passing, the spirit of Hulkamania still runs wild, right where he rests. The morning of the tribute dawned in Clearwater, with the kind of flawless Florida weather that felt almost too perfect to be coincidence. The air was warm but not oppressive, the sky a deep, uninterrupted blue streaked with faint wisps of cloud, and a light sea breeze drifted inland from the Gulf. It was the kind of day Hulk Hogan would have loved, the kind that practically begged for sunglasses, a sleeveless shirt, and a long walk near the water. By 8 a.m., the cemetery gates were already seeing a slow trickle of visitors. Some had arrived hours early, unwilling to risk missing a seat. They came in Hogan's colors, red and yellow shirts, vintage Hulkamania bandanas tied around their foreheads, some even wearing replicas of his championship belts slung over their shoulders. But there was no rowdy energy, no blaring music. The crowd moved quietly, speaking in low tones, as though instinctively understanding that this was sacred ground. The cemetery staff, along with Linda Hogan's small volunteer team, guided people down the winding path toward the grave. The marble bench and the eagle statue stood gleaming, freshly polished the day before. Every flower in the arrangement had been replaced that morning, their colors rich and vibrant under the sun. Beside the bench sat a small table stacked neatly with single-stem roses, red and yellow, each tied with ribbon, and the commemorative cards Linda had commissioned. As each guest arrived, they were handed one of each with a quiet welcome. "Thank you for coming." By mid-morning, the trickle had become a steady stream. The seating Linda had arranged neat rows of folding chairs under the shade of the palms began to fill. Those who couldn't find a chair settled on the grass, some cross-legged, some leaning back against the trees. It wasn't just fans. Wrestlers from different eras and promotions began arriving quietly, some instantly recognized, others blending into the crowd until whispers of their names rippled outward. There were no entourages, no security barricades. Here, they were simply mourners among mourners. Shortly after noon, Linda arrived. She wore a simple black dress with a red shawl draped around her shoulders, her hair pulled back. Her presence sent a ripple through the crowd, but no one rushed her. She walked the path slowly, carrying a small silver box in her hands. Those close enough to see knew what it was, the gold chain a wrestling brother had given her weeks earlier, asking her to place it with Hogan. She stopped at the headstone, rested her palm against the granite for a long moment, then knelt and placed the box carefully under the flowers. A quiet sigh escaped her lips before she rose and took her seat at the front. At exactly 2 p.m., the ceremony began. There was no booming announcer, no flashy introduction. Instead, a soft instrumental version of Real American played as the breeze rustled the palm fronds overhead. The first speaker was one of Hogan's oldest friends from his earliest wrestling days. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of decades of shared history. He spoke not about titles or rivalries, but about late-night drives between towns, the corny jokes Hogan loved to repeat, and the way he would always go out of his way to make the rookie on the card feel like they belonged. Next came a former tag team partner. His large frame hunched slightly as he gripped the microphone. "We called each other brothers," he said, his voice thick. "And we meant it. Even when we were mad at each other, even when the business got in the way, that bond never broke. Today, I'm standing here with all of you, and I know he'd be grinning ear to ear to see this." He paused, looked out over the crowd, and added, "What you gonna do, brother? When heaven runs wild on you?" The words, delivered with the same cadence Hogan had made famous, drew soft laughter through the tears. Several more friends and colleagues followed, each offering their own memory, a funny locker room story, a quiet act of kindness backstage, a time Hogan had stepped in to protect someone in the business. Between speakers, letters from fans were read aloud by a volunteer. One was from a woman who had met Hogan at a children's hospital when she was a young cancer patient. "He told me to fight," her letter read. "He said I was stronger than I knew. I've been cancer-free for 15 years, and I still believe it's because I carried his words with me." Then came the moment Linda had planned for months. She rose from her seat, walked to the small plaque set into the ground beside the bench, and, with the help of one of the volunteers, gently lifted the cloth covering it. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Hogan's familiar looping signature was revealed, etched deep into the metal, with his famous mantra beneath: "Train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins." Linda's voice was soft, but unwavering as she spoke. This was who he was, she said. Not just the man in the ring, but the man at home, the man with his friends, the man who believed in discipline, faith, and taking care of yourself. If you leave here with anything today, let it be this: keep those words alive. The ceremony closed not with applause, but with an unbroken procession to the grave. One by one, guests stepped forward to lay their roses against the headstone, some touching the granite, some whispering a private goodbye. Wrestlers waited their turn alongside fans, no one pushing ahead, no one rushing the moment. The stack of roses grew until the base of the grave was a sea of red and yellow. As the sun began to dip, casting long golden streaks across the grass, a small group of Hogan's closest friends gathered near the bench. Someone produced a small portable speaker, and for the first time that day, the original Real American theme began to play, not loudly, but just enough for everyone to hear. Conversations stopped. People turned toward the grave, and without prompting, they began to sing along. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't in unison, but it was heartfelt. By the time the song ended, the crowd had thinned. Those who remained lingered in small groups, some swapping stories, others just sitting quietly. Linda stayed until the very end, watching as the last guest placed his rose and walked away. When she was alone, she sat on the bench, the plaque gleaming beside her, the grave now blanketed in flowers. She looked out over the space and smiled faintly. "You brought them together again," she whispered, as if speaking directly to him. And in that moment, under the Florida sky, with the scent of roses in the air and the soft sound of the waves just beyond the trees, it was impossible not to feel that Hulkamania truly was still running wild, not in arenas, but in the hearts of everyone who had gathered there to remember. In the days after the tribute, Clearwater felt different. The cemetery, usually a place of solitary reflection, carried a lingering energy from that afternoon, as if the warmth of the crowd, the voices raised together for Real American, and the countless small acts of remembrance had settled into the soil itself. Staff members remarked that, even after the chairs had been folded away and the sound system packed up, the site seemed full, as though the presence of hundreds of people had imprinted something invisible but enduring into the space. Word of the event spread far beyond Florida. Local newspapers ran front-page photos of the sea of red and yellow roses carpeting the grave. National wrestling news outlets posted videos from fans' phones, shaky but powerful, capturing Linda's unveiling of the plaque and the emotional reading of letters. On social media, hashtags like #HulkForever and #HeavenRunsWild trended for days, filled with snapshots from those who had attended and reflections from those who wished they could have been there. One widely shared image showed the bronze eagle bathed in the golden light of sunset, wings glinting, with the plaque and flowers below, a scene that quickly became the defining photograph of the day. For many who were there, the tribute was more than an event. It was a turning point in how they carried Hogan's memory. Fans who had long clung to their childhood memories of his matches now spoke about him as a figure of personal inspiration, not just entertainment. Wrestlers who had been out of the public eye for years found themselves reconnecting with old friends they hadn't seen since the road days. Their conversations sparked anew at the gravesite. "It was like a locker room reunion," one former performer said. Except this time, nobody was cutting promos. "We were just people." Remembering. Linda Hogan's role did not go unnoticed. Though she had refused interviews in the lead-up, the respect for her grew in the aftermath. Writers and fans alike praised the grace with which she had handled the day, balancing public access with private dignity. "She made it about him," one wrestling journalist wrote. "No gimmicks, no exploitation, just a promise kept and a legacy honored." In the days that followed, Linda began receiving hundreds of handwritten letters from around the world. Many included stories of personal struggles and victories that the writers credited, at least in part, to Hogan's words or presence. She read each one, often at night by the dim glow of her living room lamp, and set them carefully in a box marked Hogan Anniversary. There was also an unanticipated ripple effect. Several youth organizations and fitness programs reported a surge in donations and volunteer sign-ups after the tribute. Whether it was the result of the event's coverage or the plaque's famous message, train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins, something had clearly resonated. Linda quietly directed some of the goodwill toward the charitable initiative she had been developing, a program she planned to launch under Hogan's name to support underprivileged kids in sports. The wrestling world, too, felt the impact. A month later, a major wrestling promotion aired a short, unscheduled video package honoring Hogan, using clips from the tribute alongside highlights from his career. It was the first time in years that wrestlers from multiple rival companies had been featured in the same segment, each offering a brief word or memory. In an industry often divided by brand loyalty and corporate politics, the sight of so many different faces united by one man's influence was striking. For one night, a commentator noted, everybody was on the same team, Hogan's team. Even those who couldn't attend the tribute found their own ways to connect. Small, unofficial gatherings sprang up in cities across the U.S. and abroad, fans meeting in bars to watch old matches, families holding backyard BBQs in red and yellow, charity 5 Burmese chats organized in his honor. In Tokyo, a group of Japanese wrestling fans gathered at a sports cafe, streamed footage from the Clearwater event, and took turns sharing how Hogan's persona had inspired them to chase their own goals. It was a reminder that while the grave itself was in Florida, Hogan's reach had always